Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Chris Shar, President of One Supply and Vice President of Business Development and Sales at ATG Pharma. Thank you very much for joining me today, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, David. Pleasure to be on.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at David@Cannabis Equipment News with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletters. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Chris, I always like to start with a bit of background. I actually say it the exact same way every time, so I apologize if that gets annoying to people that listen. But how did you get your start in the cannabis industry?
Okay, yeah, happy to share the story. So I guess as you can tell, I look pretty young. So I've been my entire career so far since I was 20, or actually 19, has been in the cannabis industry. So it's the only industry that I know. Obviously, I had some involvement in the pharmaceutical and nutraceutical space over the years, but predominantly got into the cannabis industry kind of randomly. I was in college, and my housemate at the time, Devin Leo, who's one of my partners now, his dad came by to take him out for dinner. Actually was doing some work passing through our college town, and on a whim just invited me out for dinner. Ended up on a 6-hour kind of tailspin conversation, learning more about his business. And that was kind of the inception. So kind of the backstory was he worked in the pharmaceutical industry for about 20 years. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I kind of started a small business in my first year of university. And then this was now flash forward in second year. Ended up chatting about, my aspirations of wanting to be an entrepreneur. He ironically was an entrepreneur as well. So he left the pharmaceutical industry. He was an industrial engineer building large scale packaging automation for AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, a number of pharmaceutical companies, and then eventually branched off and started the early days of ATG Pharma. As it's known today, ironically, it's very prominent in the cannabis industry. But at the time, it was actually just focused on pharmaceutical equipment, validation. And then he actually ended up starting to build his own equipment in a garage, believe it or not. And so the whole concept of his business and his vision for ATG was there's large scale, super expensive, fully automated equipment that you think traditionally in, Advil or Coca-Cola, where they're just producing one product continuously. So no changeover, just super high volume, super high, throughput, very expensive. And those machines essentially are developed for big scale pharma. So if you're a small natural health company, you're a nutraceutical company, you're starting out and developing a new type of capsule, for example, that equipment traditionally is extremely expensive and kind of out of the realm of possibility. You don't need it to be obviously so automated, a lot of small batches for these smaller companies. And really, the options were at the time, super manual, like pipette style filling, or fully auto, or you're going through a co-packer. So his whole intention as he started working more in the, smaller companies, he was getting, more and more requests for these small scale machines. And there was nothing on the market for it. So he set out in his garage to start developing kind of the early stages of our current RoboCap system. And I thought it was cool. I was in business. He was an engineer. He didn't really have a website. He didn't really have sales. And his challenge was he has to make one, then sell one, make one, and then sell one. So he didn't have that scalability for growth in the business. And so ended up joining him in the summer. Being a business background, kind of redid the branding of the company, redid the website, and started looking at, who actually wants to buy these machines. And sure enough, this was 2014, 2015. And cannabis, especially in Canada, because we're based in Canada and so am I, that was like pre-legalization, but all the big kind of companies that we know today, the Auroras, the Tilrays, the Canopies, they were all like 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 people, just starting up their business. And so started to do a little bit more research, ended up booking us into a trade show called Lift. And so that was in Toronto, 2016, set up a little booth, brought the machine. And then sure enough, by the end of the show, we had like a lineup at our booth, like people trying to give us cash for the system and saying like, we need this for capsules, we need this for tinctures. There's nothing that we currently have that kind of fulfills our needs. And then that's how it all started. Never looked back, and started in a garage and built it up to where we are today.
So when you came on, was it still in the garage?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was in second year college or university. And I drove 30 minutes in the summer every day to a garage. And it was myself, Devin Leo, who's my partner, and then Mike Leo, the original founder of ATG and the president. He became head engineer. Devin, my housemate, became head of operations, and I oversaw all the business growth development, obviously repositioning the equipment to the cannabis industry. And it was the three of us in the garage for first year. And then we got pretty busy. I ended up going back into my final semester, and just pretty much working on the business from my classroom. So I was making quotes. I actually have a lot of clients that I still work with today. And we always have a joke that I was in an entrepreneurship class at school, working on my business, making quotes, and I still work with a lot of the customers today. So it's pretty cool, kind of full circle. And then my other business partner ended up dropping out just because we got so busy with orders. We needed someone to fulfill the early days of the machine orders. And so he stayed, worked at the garage. And then the summer when I came back, we actually moved into our first facility, started hiring some staff, doing more trade shows, more expansion, and kind of continue to keep, innovating the product line.
What was the small business that you had in university?
It was, so there's a thing in Canada called College Pro, so that you basically get a small area, a contact list, and then you could either do painting services or window cleaning. So it was kind of funny. I just signed up randomly in my first year. Some random class, someone came in and was speaking about, oh, you can start your own company in the summer. We kind of show you how to run your own business. And I was always interested, even in high school and even prior, always to run my own business, and my family is in that. So I was always interested in that. So I signed up, forgot about it, and then 4 or 5 months later, I was thinking about what I wanted to do in the summer. A lot of my friends were going into finance and working for Goldman Sachs and more of the traditional financial route. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to kind of start my own company that summer. And then that same week, when I was thinking of ideas to kind of start a business, the College Pro rep called me and said, "Hey, you signed your name 5 months ago. You get to run your own business in the summer." And I'm like, this is perfect. I totally forgot that I even signed up for this. I want to run my own company. And then kind of got really into that. So it was a window cleaning business. I had 4 staff I had to hire. They gave me a list of past jobs that were performed in that neighborhood, and you got a certain area code that was your territory, quote unquote. And I just sat in my dorm room calling these people up and booking jobs for the summer, and I got addicted to it. I played varsity football actually in my university, ended up quitting. I was a quarterback, and I just got all into business and never looked back.
I mean, what did the team do with all of a sudden without their quarterback?
I wasn't a starter by any measure. So I was a kind of a redshirt freshman, and there was a starting quarterback 4th year and then a 5th year. And so I was basically like a 2-year investment of me, working under these guys, staying the summer. So I actually ended up having a heart-to-heart with the quarterback who was a starter, and we took me out for lunch. We were chatting. He's like, honestly, I felt like I kind of wasted my 5 years not pursuing my future, especially in Canada. In all honesty, it's not like it's in the US where you actually have a shot for pro. The best I could make it is the CFL here in Canada, which is not that lucrative per se. So I just made that decision. Had a lot of good buddies from it, but wanted to switch over to the business, more entrepreneurial focused way. And then thankfully just opened up obviously all the opportunities for me to do this window cleaning business, and then stacked into this opportunity of just kind of starting the early days of ATG and running the sales side. So a lot of the the original essence and lessons that you get just going door to door, running a small business, I was able to apply it to this business at a younger age, and then opportunities just stack and stack, of course, as you go on through the years, and you kind of take those lessons.
So did you ace the entrepreneurship class, and did you finish school?
I I can't recall if I aced it or not.
I mean, I feel like if you're doing a legit running a business in an entrepreneurship class, like I feel like that's just like a straight A.
I would say so, yes, but that just means that I had to apply myself to the assignments. I think at that point I was already checked out, in all honesty. I started an entrepreneurship club at my university. And the whole concept was to connect engineers and business people and just different faculties together, because I found at university everyone's very fragmented. So like the business people just hang out with business people, engineers just really hang out with engineers. And obviously in a company, as you know, you need the different skill sets obviously to build a successful team. So I just felt like bringing everyone together in a space. So I would say school, I was most excited about my club, working on my business, just meeting really cool people and having these discussions. The school part per se, I just felt like it wasn't serving me in the last couple of years. I did graduate, or at least I got all the credits to graduate. I just haven't actually picked up my diploma yet. It's been so kind of out of mind. I was too excited about the future and everything that was going on with cannabis. The one point I will say though, which is funny, is that at that time, I felt very embarrassed to actually talk about people and say that I was in cannabis. I actually said that I was in pharmaceuticals because at the time, especially just in university and in a kind of highly regarded business program, it was very taboo. And this is pre-legalization. I feel like now, obviously, it has a much different connotation around it, but it is kind of ironic when I look back on it that for that first year or so, I was kind of I was telling people I was in pharmaceuticals. I wasn't admitting that I was in cannabis because it was so nuanced. But
Yeah,
I guess that's where all the opportunities lie, right?
absolutely. Did you name it ATG? Is it called ATG Pharma specifically because of that kind of fear about being a cannabis company?
So the original name was when Mike Leo, our founder, was in the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
So the ATG stands for Advanced Technologies Group. So the whole concept was we're going to make technology and equipment and solve pain points in the pharmaceutical industry. We actually kept pharma because, especially in Canada, in the early days, a lot of these Canadian LPs were run like pharmaceutical companies. Just the regulatory requirements, the GMP compliant state, and a lot of the ex-employees from pharma were coming into cannabis. So we saw it very prominently in Canada that most of the early companies had a lot of ex-pharma and pharmaceutical people, especially from the compliance side. And in Canada, it was very, very compliance heavy. So we just leaned into that. I was obviously very young. I was only 20 years old. So a lot of these pharmaceutical guys would look at me like, what do you know? So I leaned into our kind of our past. And then I also brought in my co-founder, who obviously is the brains behind, the original equipment, the compliance around it, how it's built. And so we use that to our advantage, and it served us very well in the early days, just because it felt familiar to a lot of these ex-pharmaceutical people that were coming into cannabis. We really want, and we still kept that brand today. If you look at it, there's obviously a lot of companies that are very, I would say not gray market, but it's a little bit different of a concept. We kind of wanted to bring in the pharmaceutical regulatory trustworthy feel in our brand versus more of a especially when you're in automation, we wanted to kind of build that trust and keep that brand going. And pharma obviously keeps that the highest standard you can get. So
I mean, that makes sense. After that first trade show lifts, did you have any issues scaling with the sudden increase in demand?
There was a lot of issues at the early days because we had no idea how to run essentially a manufacturing company. We went from selling one or two of these machines over a course of a few months to having orders of someone wanted to buy the machine on site cash, and then we had orders lined up. Obviously, it didn't all amount right away, but we went from again building one machine every couple of months to one a week to eventually one a day. So each stage we went through, there was a lot of pain points, a lot of issues, a lot of mistakes that we made that we had to course correct and fix, and then, bring in new personnel that were experts in their own domains, to obviously lean off of, because the three of us have never built obviously a manufacturing company before. So it's still today constantly, you're constantly learning.
What were some of those mistakes? Just because a lot of companies you see kind of get crushed under that weight and never really make it out.
Yeah. I mean, obviously management of inventory. So we manufacture. So we ended up, perfect example was we make all our trays custom. So companies, one of the big values of the equipment is that if you have a unique pod or a tincture or, a different type of vape card or disposable, especially in the early days, we would make those custom for every single machine. And then obviously one of the challenges was we leaned when we were in the early days on a third party tray manufacturer to cut. So we'd send him all the samples. He would cut all the trays, and then he would ship it back to us, and we put it all together and ship out the machine with these trays. He just vanished for 3 weeks at one point. We had 4 or 5 orders, and he just decided to go on vacation. And so it, destroyed our good standing with customers. People needed the machines, and we were just stuck in a hard place, obviously with a PO cut to him. And, it delayed our orders by weeks and weeks for customers, especially in the early days when you're trying to build a brand. It's just, and everyone at that time was just, trying to get their equipment in place, launching products. Like, it was a very, intense couple of years. So you can't have that, obviously. And so we realized that we can't rely on, third-party manufacturers as much. So we ended up bringing a lot of the things in-house. So now we have a full machine shop in-house. We can control the quality, obviously, is key. You can't control that when you're outsourcing it. We control the price. We reduced our price. And then slowly now with our machine shop, we're able to bring in more and more in-house so we can control as much as possible and not rely on these third parties. So that was, I would say, like, when I look back on it, that was probably the most stressful time when we had to rely on these third parties. And we still do, right? Like, there's obviously still supply chain that you have to outsource. And so that's still a challenge that we face today of just stocking inventory, preparing for, for bigger runs, forecasting, all standard stuff you kind of start to, challenges manufacturers face today.
What was the first machine? And then how did you guys sort of build a roadmap as to the different applications that you're going to attack with automation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the original machine was a capsule filling machine. So 2-piece capsules. That's why, predominantly that was the main product form in pharmaceuticals. And then coming into cannabis on the medicinal side, capsules were still pre-vapes, pre-gummies, pre-everything. It was just capsules and tinctures, like, the oil dropper bottles, 1 ounce or 2 ounce bottles. So we went, product roadmap kind of went capsule filler, and then we ended up making a bottle tray and a different type of filling system. And so the same machine could actually, you can have a full capsule setup and then remove the capsule tray and then put on the custom made tray for tinctures. And we had a different filling application using a peristaltic pump filler. And then we could start filling, tinctures with the system, capsules, and then vapes. Obviously, it came online too. And then we started building the vape application. So then how we kind of looked holistically on our system, and we were really the first kind of filling machine to do this, was the same base platform machine a company can buy and then have, so you can look at it as like a base pizza when you're making a pizza online. And then the toppings were the different configurations. So you can, on our website, it's kind of cool, on the ATG website, you can go and companies can build their own robot. So you can get the base robot, and then you can add the configuration that's specific to capsules, or you can get the configuration that's specific to tinctures or to vape carts. So one machine essentially can, facilitate or fill and make 3 or 4 or 5 different products. So obviously that's very unique and beneficial for companies, that they don't have to go out and buy, 5 or 6 different machines for each application from 5 or 6 different manufacturers. They can just work with us and get 1 or 2 machines that can support all the different, form factors, vapes, gummies, capsules, tinctures, creams, bombs.
As you were staffing up and looking for machine builders, Were you looking for anybody with any particular experience? Like, were you looking for people with pharmaceutical machine building experience, or were you kind of just looking for quality engineers that could, fill a role?
Early days, we didn't, because we bootstrapped the company. So we didn't have a huge budget. We were just trying to facilitate and fill roles. So the cool thing about our business was we hired a lot of people early in their careers who were very hungry. So we had people would look at us and we had a young team, but it was just very ambitious, eager. We hired based off of those merits. Like, you want to grow the company, you want to be on the original kind of founding team per se, and kind of, build your career around it. So in those early years, we would just bring on anyone who's hungry, eager to learn and kind of support. Obviously, as we got to a certain point, like we had bigger budget and grew in size and in responsibilities for our customers. So then we started obviously hiring more key roles that were a little bit more specialized, I guess.
Okay.
Lean on the experts, of course.
So with equipment now that's suited for nearly every product category in cannabis, what is the most popular line of late?
So I guess like I can share the backstory of One Supply, because you can obviously see this isn't the ATG side. Right. So just recently, and then I can kind of answer that question. We've kind of made a decision as a founding group to split the company into two. So ATG obviously still is continued today. And how we built the business now is ATG is focused as a equipment manufacturer and R&D company. So we have a facility in Oakville, Ontario. We manufacture all the equipment, and the staff looks more focused. When you look at like the org chart, it's very focused on applications engineers, R&D, and production and manufacturing. So we built like a very core focused company. One Supply now, we've taken our sales and marketing team and have actually created a holistic portfolio of different automation equipment. So ATG is one part of that. So if a cannabis company, because now we work with probably over 300 cannabis companies across the world. So 60 or so in Canada, work with another 200 or so across the US, from small companies, single state to MSOs. And then now we've been really focused on Europe and Australia. And so one of the things that we realized the last couple of years was that a lot of these companies they needed automation support across the board. And at the time, we were just serving ATG, so we can come in and we can help them on automating their cart production for vape carts, for tinctures. But then they would start talking about gummy cooking machines or pre-roll machines or gummy depositing or packaging equipment. So there was all these other kind of automation needs that at the time ATG, obviously, we can't develop everything under one roof. And so One Supply branched off as a different brand where we come in as automation consultants or a one-stop shop where we can supply everything ATG, but now we have a portfolio of additional equipment. So we have a full gummy division now. We have a full pre-roll and infused pre-roll division. So we've kind of built this one-stop shop as a automation partner to cannabis companies.
So is One Supply completely separate from ATG?
They're affiliate companies. So a lot of the original owners, we toggle between both. So I've kind of moved my day-to-day to One Supply. So I'm focused on One Supply, but I'm still an active vice president of sales and marketing at ATG. So I can still help with, because my team and myself, we're in with cannabis companies on a daily basis. So I'm going back to the ATG team and saying, hey, this is kind of what customers are saying. This is the new developments that we're looking for. This is what's hot. This is their pain points. So the companies work very symbiotically, of course. But from a branding perspective, we made the choice, and it was a weird choice because most of people that I work with for 6-7 years knew me as the ATG guy. So the last 12 months kind of shifting into a One Supply brand has been hard, but the right move, just because we don't want to dilute the ATG brand as a focused filling machine, and bringing in other manufacturers and diluting that brand just didn't make sense. So that's why we made the call to kind of, from a client facing perspective, split up the two companies and what they do.
When you're talking to clients, what are these cannabis companies looking for? What are some gaps in the market still that you're looking to fill with new features on your machines?
Yeah, so I'd say vapes obviously is still like you can't not look at vapes. It's second and third highest product categories in both Canada and the US. Obviously, flowers is still high, but when it comes to oils, that's where we predominantly focus on. Vapes is there's so much development still and growth for the vape market, and it's such an easy product to also be really, really efficient at production. And I think a lot of companies there's still a lot of room to be done in terms of improving their processes. Like we've just did a large kind of partnership with C-Cell, but we work with ABD, Green Tank, all the largest vape suppliers in the world to make preloaded trays. So coming right from their factories in China, the trays come preloaded, you drop it onto the machine, and then after it's filled, the mouthpieces come on and you close them all at once. And it's a really cool relationship that we've done and created with these vape cart suppliers. And I would say it would reduce your labor costs by over 80 to 90%, giving you like massive profits. And I would say 80% of companies are still not fully explored in that side yet. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on the vape side. And we can kind of keep talking about that. But obviously gummies is like, I would say right now our hottest product category as well. Gummies are still massive growth. Year over year, there's been, I think, a 54% growth in gummies, and it's not slowing down. Massive market, big volumes. And then on the side note, infused pre-rolls. Obviously, I think they had a 600% year over year growth in Canada. They're blowing up everywhere. So we have a pretty cool infused pre-roll solution that we've been offering that a lot of companies are getting excited about. So those are our main three categories. We were doing some stuff in cultivation, but I've kind of now really wanted to narrow the team to be known as the core experts on vapes, pre-rolls, especially pre-roll infusing, and gummies.
Okay.
There's more than enough work to be done just in those three categories for us.
Okay, so you kind of stay away from flower.
We do, yeah. The rationale I use, and this is why we don't touch any extraction equipment too, is that if you can't be the best at a certain thing, like there's no point of trying to pursue it, in a sense of like, we don't want to be imposters. I've never talked about, extraction equipment with my customers because there's really good companies that only focus on extraction. And so we don't want to pretend like we're the experts on that. Another example is we don't sell vape carts. We've been approached by a lot of companies because they're like, hey, if you're working with all these companies, why don't you insert our vape carts as a secondary offering with your machine? I've always held true to this, that we're not experts on vape carts. I don't want to pretend like we are. We work really closely with a lot of companies. We have like an affiliate program and we do a lot of referrals or we share business, but never want to be in a position where we're selling stuff that we can't stand by or know 100%.
So you're talking about reducing labor, especially with vapes, 80 to 90%, but it sounded like a lot of people are still hesitant to bring this automation in-house. Is it a problem with capital, or is it just people don't believe those figures?
Honestly, all of the above. It's tough. It varies per customer. I think the capital is interesting too, because you do show the figures of like, hey, we can save you. If you have like 10 people or 8 people doing this production, we can bring this down to one or two. You're saving $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month potentially on labor cost. I think the challenge too is that people don't want to fire people, and like I get that. I 100% don't want to stand here and say you gotta let these people go. It's not, that's kind of the negative rhetoric I'd say around automation. Our whole purpose is showing them where they can reposition their personnel, because you don't have to let people go. I think you can put people in more higher leverage roles than just standing there capping a bunch of carts for 8 hours a day. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is getting people to figure out what to actually do with their staff if they're already on staff, and we don't want to force that to let people go. So I think that's a big challenge, is just getting people around that and companies to be, thinking differently around their staff. And then capital is tough in this industry, and we're seeing it more and more, especially the last 12 months. I would say companies are a lot more hesitant to purchase. And so people don't want to stick their necks out and make a mistake and get fired if they're comfortable doing something that works.
That makes sense. But is that hesitance to fire people unique to cannabis? Just because I feel like in nearly every other industry, ROI is a pretty simple equation.
Honestly, I'm potentially yes, especially on the smaller kind of stateside companies. I think there's a sense of a little bit more unity and a family feel in a lot of these cannabis companies, which is good and bad. Obviously, don't get me wrong. I think that makes a lot of these smaller companies and their brands really strong. But the challenge is, and you have to look at both sides. If you're not making money and there's price compression and there's more entrance of competition, I hate to make it seem like it, but if you don't automate, you don't look at these bottom lines and know your numbers, and we're seeing it, a lot of companies will start going under, and it is happening. So in my opinion, it's almost like, does it make sense to invest in automation and then save most, like, your company and most of your staff? And that's kind of the thing that companies have to look at.
You said you're working in multiple markets around the world, but I'm curious about what's the difference between cannabis companies in the U.S. and cannabis companies in Canada, in your opinion?
It's actually shifted a lot in both ways. So I would say if we look back 5 years ago, it was night and day in the sense of Canada was because it was legalized on a national scale. It had to be looked at as like a pharmaceutical company from a quality perspective and in the eyes of Health Canada. So you'd walk into a lot of these cannabis companies. I was full gowned. There's been some stories where we've had to send operators and they had to take showers before and after entering the facility. So it was the Canadian companies built it super pharma, very expensive facilities. And at the time, obviously, they had publicly traded money. So it was quite funny where companies would buy a lot of automation and spend money so that they can make a press release around it and then boost up the stock even more. So it was completely different than the US. The US was a lot more gray market, obviously less regulatory. They didn't care for compliance as much. They were like happy, it was a Wild West. And then I think now it's shifted a lot where Canadian companies, as I think anyone who reads the news, it's very difficult landscape, obviously, here in Canada. The government takes 60% of your margins right off the bat just as a pass through. And they have their own, obviously, internal conflicts. So squeezes the producers where they make no money. I've even heard stories of a company investing $1 million in a vault, and then the week after, or less than a week, the Canadian government changes regulatories to not require that anymore. So they just blew $1 million just like that in a week. So I would say that's what we saw. And then now, Canadian companies, I'm finding, are buying less frequently. They're closing shops down. We've actually started a contract packaging company in Canada that a lot of companies who are kind of closing down their facilities and trying to look at being as efficient as possible, they're actually sending us product, and we have our own equipment in a licensed facility, just doing service runs for them so that they don't have to have, massive overhead. They don't have to purchase equipment. So we've established that in Canada. The US, it's state by state. You have every single state is its own, own world in a sense that we're finding. So,
okay. With some of the issues that people have with the markets contracting and trouble finding capital, do you guys get creative when it comes to financing machines at all?
We have a really good finance partner that we just found. It's been very difficult to find a good finance partner, I'm not gonna lie. We probably looked for 5 years and went through many different finance companies, which is totally fair. I don't blame them. I think a lot of companies obviously come try and look for financing who don't have a lot of past history or cash flow or revenue, and it's all speculation. So it's difficult to get financing. Just recently, though, we just started working with a company that has been supporting us quite well. But other than that, we are still somewhat risk adverse of doing anything creative just because we're still, we still look at ourselves as a small company. We have to, just because we didn't go in and raise all this money. We run a very like lean and tight ship so that we can obviously survive and continue to navigate the ebbs and flows of this industry. And we don't want to be in a position where we're giving out equipment to someone in, California that we don't know, and then they default on their payments, or they don't, we have to be chasing them for that final 50%. So we do require all 100% payment up front before it leaves our facility. We've been pretty firm on that. But if we work with a big MSO and we have a relationship, we'll start giving terms and whatnot to companies like that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that just makes sense to protect yourself, from essentially, trying to run down deadbeats, I guess, for lack of a better term.
It's honestly, it's hard. Yeah. That's the thing with the industry too. I mean, like, it's getting a lot more professional, I think, in the US, but to your point, kind of a side story, which is quite funny, is that, in the early days when I was sharing that, like, Canada was very pharma, the US was hit or miss depending on what state you were in. We would go from doing a service call to someone that is basically running a pharmaceutical company, fully gowned in a GMP facility, to the next call, like literally right after, to a guy in his bedroom smoking a blunt, moving his bed to set up a machine. And so it's we've seen it all.
Yeah.
So obviously, hence our hesitation, because we've worked with, I would say for the most part, companies have been amazing to work with, but with every industry, especially a new one where people are chasing money and it's kind of a little bit of the Wild West. I mean, you get burned enough, companies go under doing that, loading out and giving up too much equipment.
So, in that scenario, is it lean manufacturing to go with like more of a loft or like a Murphy style bed?
Right? Probably. Exactly. You have to move it.
Talking about GMP compliance and that switch that you're seeing in the United States, are you seeing more people kind of try and be GMP compliant out of the gate, or is there still a little hesitation there as to kind of just doing what they need in order to be compliant state to state?
I think it's the latter, unfortunately. We're trying to push the narrative, because with GMP compliance, it forces you to look at and run your business a bit differently. So obviously, like SOPs, training, these are all inherently still issues that we see in the industry. Like with MSOs, for example, we're just now, which is very positive, seeing a lot of our MSO clients making it their number one priority and agenda to standardize their facilities. Like, we've been pushing this narrative for years to say, you have California with completely different equipment than Arizona, with a completely different equipment than Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. So it just, now they're looking at getting the same equipment, getting the same processes, cross training. They're having these kind of national trainers being that know the equipment and the processes. They can go in and they can start to emulate, because then you can look at this data and say, okay, why is this state, 100, they're producing twice as much vapes a day or per shift as this next state. If you have different systems and processes and different equipment that's not all standard, you can't cross train or make different facilities more efficient. So we're really trying to work with our MSO partners or any company in that fact and that's when GMP is very important, because it forces you to do that, the proper documentation, the proper SOPs, the proper, setup guides and install. A lot of that stuff, I would say, people overlooked with automation, and automation is only as good as your team that knows how to support it. I think a lot of people think that you can just get a machine, you can plug it in, and it'll just start, firing vapes. And for the most part, we try to make it as simple as possible. And we have training videos and libraries and support companies, but turnover is massive in this space. A lot of companies have a lot of temp agencies or temp groups, and then you get a full new team, and then they're sitting on all this equipment that they don't know how to run. So I would say that's like the more important than the GMP side. And I think if you can like nail those concepts, you can make a lot more money, or I guess inherently save a lot more money that directly impacts your bottom line.
Are MSOs in that position traditionally because they're growing via acquisition, or just because otherwise having such disparate equipment and operations just like makes no sense?
Acquisition's a big part. Like one of our MSOs, I can't say, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but they had a massive acquisition. So they bought a bunch of facilities. And so now they're working on cleaning that out. But it's a long process, like 18, 24 months of cutting through all this, you know, all this old equipment and try to standardize. And then some MSOs, which is, it was their strategy of growth, they would put president heads of each state that were inherently signing off the checks on what to get for the facility. So they didn't have like a national policy of, hey, we should be getting this equipment. So our best MSO clients have that national look where they almost have this group of trusted manufacturers of trimmers and extraction equipment and milling equipment, obviously vape filling and production. And then they're just, every facility they expand, they copy and paste, they get the training, the tech team, the SOPs. That's the only way to do it, especially in this environment where you have to inherently have facilities in every single state. There's no other way to do it.
What is the process internally of deciding when you're going to launch a new machine and then the design and development of that machine before it's, goes to market?
Most of our, because you asked earlier about our product roadmap, we're still in the position where most of our products that we develop are from a customer situation, like a unique, like the original, like infused. When you look at the infused pre-rolls is really big now. All those developments come from a customer pitching the use case. And then how we look at it is we have a beta program. We have an applications engineer team that kind of works with that customer. And then then we'll obviously start to build some market data on it. We'll start doing some more research, but all our developments came from not us just sitting in a room being like, what's next? It's always about, being on the floor with the customer, being in facilities, asking them what they need, listening to our customers, and then starting to build, do these beta projects. Obviously, some have legs, some don't. We'll make the sale one way or another, and then we could figure out, okay, this is actually a priority. We see some opportunity here, and then we'll put into a proper, product launch roadmap after that.
Do you design differently for the cannabis market?
Well, now with obviously like the product in the sense of, distillates, resins, all the changes with concentrates and the viscosity, significantly different than, what you see on traditional nutraceutical or natural health companies that we've worked with in the past. So yeah, like in terms of our vape filling solution, that we don't sell that solution for anywhere else. We could take a lot of the components and do chapstick and different bombs. We work closely with some other big cosmetics companies, but I would say it was inherently built for cannabis and just the nature and of the product and the viscosity. So
I guess when you were talking about labor and I guess the skill level of some of these employees in the cannabis industry, do you have to take that into account where it's like, okay, it needs to be one button?
Yeah, it has to be. I think a lot of companies, the equipment's overcomplicated because it comes from other industries. It goes back to those processes. You can only make equipment so easy, like if it's just one button, especially we're talking about automation. If it's like a semi-auto, that's a lot easier. But if there's some intricacies of the machine and it's somewhat automated, there's going to be some, expertise that's required. So we obviously do training videos. We have a training library of like, plug in this, plug in that. If this is the issue, do this, quick startup guides. We're actually moving to like QR codes on the machine. So companies can just scan, like if a new operator comes in, they can actually scan the QR code and that part of that machine, like if it's a heating system and there's some intricacies there, they can scan and say, hey, this is how to turn on the heating system. This is how to set the temperature of the machine. So those little things continue to keep supporting it because it's funny, like, and any machine company will say this, they make as good of technology as possible, but if the operators know how to use it, it's a whole new team. It is just a paperweight at the end of the day. Yeah. It just sits in their facility, and you see that too often, and it's quite sad.
Well, and it sounds like you're doing a lot when it comes to training and having the materials available. What about on the maintenance side, when it comes to like preventative maintenance and just making sure that these machines don't go down?
Yeah, preventative maintenance is big. We actually, I don't know if it was a good strategy or not, but we currently don't have we don't force companies to do like a maintenance plan with us. It's not in our, it wasn't in our strategy, just didn't feel 100% right. So what we do is we give guides on like product life. So if you're filling a certain amount of product through the system, every 6 months, you might need to buy some consumables. But our equipment now, we have probably 350 robots in the field at least. We haven't had to like return a machine and like replace it. The main kind of use, I would say, like worn out parts are just spare parts that just standard, a couple $100, $1,000 every few months, just to repurchase and freshen up, like tubing, syringes, O-rings, ball bearings, and then we just have these spare parts packages that we can provide and sell back to companies.
Okay. How often is somebody at One Supply picking up the phone and it's something they never expected from a client in terms of some sort of issue or question?
So on the ATG side, I would say we probably heard it all now because that's our longest kind of standing product line. We're getting into gummies now. So gummies has been, I would say, the largest growth part of our business in terms of servicing new customers, building out our own kind of technical support team just for gummies. I think anyone who's in gummies, it can always be different. Like the ingredients, the recipes, if you're using pectin or gelatin, I think it's always there's always these nuances that we don't factor for. But I guess that's the fun of being in it. We're always learning and we work obviously hand in hand. I think companies know when they call us that we're in it together. We obviously try to come in and know as much as possible and have this years of experience. But if stuff does go wrong and there's issues, we're there working together, trying to figure it out hand in hand to kind of solve for our customers' issues.
What has it been like watching some of these clients that started off, in their bedroom and growing into larger companies? Do you kind of follow them along that path, or is there at some point where you kind of hand them off because they need something larger?
Well, that's the cool thing about One Supply is that that's our vision, is that we want to continue being that partner. And if we can't make it, we'll support that larger scale. So on our gummy side, for example, we have machines now that are $1 million, $2 million gummy machines. So they're full integrated cooker, cooling tunnel, packaging line, like the full works. So our intention is that we want to continue to be that automation partner for the entire lifespan. So we've been working with some companies from 2015, 2016, where there was 4 or 5 guys. One of my good friends, shout out Mario for Motif Labs in Canada. I think they just hit 1 million vapes a month in production. And him and I met when it was just him and an idea, 2018, and he's built it to probably be one of the biggest Canadian cannabis companies now. Private, he's raised some money, but didn't do the public route. And they just have awesome brands, and they've been using our equipment since he started his facility, 4 or 5 years ago. And I was there just a few weeks ago, and just to see the expansion from the one site to now over 100,000 square feet plus, and the brands and the new product lines, and their teams at like 250 people. So it is cool to be able to be part of that whole journey and just watch the industry kind of go from inception and be a trusted partner to a lot of these companies for all these years.
Did the operator who was working out of his bedroom scale?
No, no, I don't think so. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of those ones. I hate to admit, it's we've worked with a lot of companies and people over the years, and it's obviously tough. But you can kind of tell who's the one that's gonna eventually make it or not. But unfortunately, I don't think we've heard from him since that time.
Okay.
I hope he's doing well. It's a great story that we still share. He seemed like a really nice guy, from what I heard.
Do you have any predictions for when the United States might have some sort of federal legalization?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't want to say things that I'm not in the political realm from that sense. From what I've heard in conversations, 3 to 5 years looks likely. So we'll obviously be keeping a close eye on it as the years come. We're very happy now. Like selfishly, I'll be honest with how it is state by state. I think from a one supply perspective, we are geared very nicely to help companies that have multiple state facilities. We've kind of built that business strategy around. Obviously, as political landscapes will change, the business, like we've done, will keep pivoting and evolving. But for right now, companies that have multiple facilities and they need help standardizing, setting up processes, cross-training, that's a really big part of our business that, we're here to help companies. And if you do it right, it can be extremely profitable still.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time today. But before we get out of here, I want to make sure, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or One Supply, or maybe whether or not you have any new equipment coming out anytime soon?
I think the biggest thing I'll lean on is, I know I've already hit on the standardization and the focus on training. The big thing that I'm seeing, and this isn't a shameless plug because I won't even talk about our machine, but the pre-roll infusion process, I think it's such a hot market right now, and I think there's a lot of different methods to doing it. We're focusing on pre-infusion, so actually homogenizing the flower prior. So if anyone obviously is interested in chatting about that, love to kind of go head to head. Obviously there's a lot of like injector pre-roll companies that are doing the post pre-roll injection. I just think that a lot of the feedback we've been seeing work with companies, it's significantly more costly. And I think the use case from like the end user, the homogenized flower burns slower, it can use nicer, it's a higher quality pre-roll than kind of that donut, and this might be completely unconventional, but sometimes that's why I think this is a good podcast. That's just our take on it. We're seeing that a lot. And we're working with a lot of companies to kind of set them up on pre-homogenization, resins, distillate. We can make oil powders. We can turn like hash butter and infuse it nicely into your cannabis flower before entering the pre-roll machines. And I think a lot of pre-roll machines out there are very difficult to use and very expensive. So I think the pre-roll market, such a hot market, and I think a lot of people just bought a bunch of equipment because they needed it. And I think there's a lot of room to just have them optimized. They don't need to spend as much money. Our goal is to try to save companies as much as possible. We've worked with some guys that got quoted $500,000, and we had a solution come at $100,000 that can produce double the output per day. So I think just be smart, look at your different options, and we try to be as agnostic when it comes to pre-rolls because we partner with manufacturers. So we try to give custom catered solutions versus if you work with one manufacturing company directly, they'll just try to sell you all their equipment. Where One Supply, what we try to do is try to piece the best of different manufacturers together to kind of give a little bit more of a custom solution. So that's kind of my final shameless plug about the company. But yeah, I am passionate about it just because I've helped 300 plus cannabis companies over my 8 years being in the industry. And I just feel like in Canada, we made a mistake. Companies bought way too much equipment that was way too expensive because they thought it was the best option. And a lot of them went insolvent or had to sell that equipment at a super reduced cost. So I just don't want to see like new US companies make that same mistake. And I am seeing it. So it's something that we're trying to passionately, solve for.
I just wanted one quick follow-up on that. So how does your infused pre-roll equipment work?
So it's a planetary mixer. So it's a homogenizing machine. So essentially we have, you get like 2 1 kg containers. You put in our machine, you can load it up, just take dried flower, pour a distillate, a resin. You can do like a THC, like diamonds we've been crushing up. You can throw it into the flower, goes into the machine, and then you have a RPM setting. So basically planetary mixing is it spins clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time. So it's fully homogenized in the flower. And then you can set the RPM from anywhere from 500 to 2000. And then in 1 minute, fully homogenized flower. And then you take that flower out, fully mixed, and then you can put it into a pre-roll machine and you're good as gold. You got your pre-roll, infused pre-rolls. So super simple solution. Same machine can also, we can make a powder. So we actually have a powder ingredient that you can put cannabis oil in, the powder, and it'll actually completely homogenize and make a cannabis powder that can go into a sachet. It's water suspendable. You can kind of, put it back into a pre-roll. You can put it into a gummy mix. So a lot of cool, unique solutions with this. We brought the tech from the pharmaceutical industry, and we've been repositioning it and supporting them for cannabis applications. So we're quite excited about it. It's called the Maz Mixer.
No, I mean, that is exciting. And it honestly makes a lot of sense having a homogenized mix in a pre-roll rather than some of the other designs out there. And honestly, I never really thought of that.
The other option is spray, like that ethanol spray. That's like through big tumbler machines. You dilute the product a lot. You get a lot of like ethanol. You have to burn off the ethanol after because you have to like pre-mix it. So this is the cleanest, highest quality method. And the cool thing about this tech is that it came from the compound pharmacy space. And essentially what it's designed for is to mix two types of ingredients that don't traditionally mix well. So like the big use case for them is powder and cream. So like if anyone who's making creams and you're throwing a powder in it, it'll get that granular, grainy feel because it's not fully mixed. So this mixer actually will give it a full, just by the RPM, a full blend. So when you take that cream out, it's a nice smooth finish. You don't feel that granular feel. So that same tech, it works really well to kind of bring these two compounds together and mix it. So water emulsion, powders, creams, but all with the same machine, which is cool. But the infused pre-roll, it's such a massive market that use case is becoming really popular for a lot of our clients. And the results are incredible that we're getting.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time today, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to learn more about, how you guys started One Supply and where you guys are at now. It's an incredible story.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. I appreciate all you guys do with Cannabis Equipment News, by the way, too. Your podcast is awesome. And I think it's a really cool platform you guys have built out. So congrats on all the success you've had.
Oh, Chris, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for saying it before the close. No.
There we go, man. Hey.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Chris Shar, president of One Supply and vice president of business development and sales at ATG Pharma, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.